16.1 Roles, Responsibilities and Skills of Coaching. Actually, Adamson-Edwards. This video will be covering the skill of time management in coaching. So, the skill of time management consists of many aspects in coaching, which allows a coach to have this skill. For example, a coach carrying the skill of time management must be aware of the time allocated. So, for example, a casual basketball coach might need to hire out a court, and therefore they are allocated a certain amount of time on the court. Therefore, they need to manage their time as well as possible, so that they can fit all of their components of the session in that time, and therefore not run over the time allocated. If this wasn't taken into consideration by the coach, then it would be an example of them having a poor time management. However, this contrasts to a coach like a football coach who may not need to worry about the hiring of facilities, as football can be played at nearly any park which is free to go on, but they wouldn't have the park for themselves and therefore could cause health and safety issues. Also, a huge part of carrying out the skill of time management would be planning before the coaching session. If a coach didn't do this, then they would not be able to just improvise a very good example of time management, and therefore could ruin the session. For example, a coach like Unai Emery, the Arsenal football coach, would need to plan out his time management before a session as an expectation, rather than a skill due to the high standard of the position. However, a casual swimming coach may not need to plan out their time management, as there is a much higher level standard, but they could possibly need to do this as an expectation to the dangers of the sport. In addition, the skill of time management involves managing attention given to the individuals that a coach is training. For example, a common stereotype in a team sport like netball is only caring about the goal attack position, as they are the ones that supposedly win the games by scoring the points. However, a coach carrying out this skill needs to give everyone the same amount of attention, and not depending on what position they are playing, and to avoid perhaps conflict, and therefore causing a coach to have a bad time management. And finally, another part of the time management would be periodization. Periodization is where a coach can use time management to plan out different periods of a sporting season to allow short and long-term goals to be achieved, and to have a structured plan for an athlete's training. For example, if an acrobatic gymnastic coach had a gymnast who has 2 years until they have an event, they would use periodization to scale up different cycles of training throughout the years to give structure to their coaching sessions. This could also be done in tennis. However, events could be a lot closer, and therefore a coach would need to use different size of training periods. Now, the advantages of time management would be productive sessions. So the skill of time management can allow the advantage of a more productive coaching session when kept by a coach. This is because having a good time management is always a better layout of drills and time for improving technique or ability, or anything else which the coach wants to add in, which needs to be done. Therefore, it's an advantage as it provides perhaps a better result for the game or match type event. This correlates to a professional rowing coach like Jürgen Grobler, who due to his context of being the GB rowing coach, would achieve this advantage through a good time management. This would also set an example to the athletes and maybe other members of staff who could be influenced by his skills and adopt his traits, therefore allowing the members of his team and athletes to also have a good time management and could be influenced and become more productive. However, this could contrast to a lower level of rowing, like a under 14s rowing coach who could use his time management to their advantage and influence the young athletes to become more productive, and therefore they could repeat this influence in the future which they adopted. Also, another advantage of time management would be allowing more support to the less confident athletes. So they'd have to dedicate a period of time in a coaching session to support the less confident people. This is an advantage because when a coach has got good time management, they can use this to their advantage. This is an advantage because this is what the less confident athletes need in order to progress, or they could struggle with skills like communication in the future. For example, an after-school athletics club coach could use the time management to dedicate some of his sessions to support a small individual in the session, which is one of the less confident athletes. However, This type of example could cause conflicts amongst the team, as there are other athletes could feel that they are being left out, and therefore could cause conflict and completely contradict the advantage. This could also relate to a similar way to sports, like when a 100-meter sprinting coach, like Glenn Mills, could provide more support to less confident runners. However, due to the context of the situation, there would be the risk of conflict as likely that he would, because he would only be coaching the individual at one time. Also, even if there were more athletes being coached at one time, due to the seriousness of the situation, they'd be expected to understand why the athlete needs more support. And finally, the skill of time management allows periodization. So, periodization is a coach breaks down the sporting year or season into different periods where each one is based on a certain goal or aspect to try and prepare a long-term event. For example, an Olympic tennis coach would scale years that they have to prepare for the event into different periods. So, for example, a megacycle could be used to a long-term period of the training, where the player would be always maintaining a decently strong period of effort throughout a training session. However, eventually, when there is little time before the event, they would change the sessions into a mesocycle period, which would only last around 1 week or so. Here, the coach would be focusing on last aspects that the player needs to improve on. If a coach had good time management, this could be achieved. This is an advantage because it allows in this case, the tennis player to spread out the focuses, and also shows that the coach has a targeted long-term goal, which would show to the player that they are in the right hands. This would be similar to a coach like Pep Guardiola for Manchester City Football Club, who wouldn't use periodization in the same format as the tennis coach, however would still use periodization to allow structure throughout the sessions and the season. And now finally, the disadvantage of time management. So a coach carrying the skill of time management can bring some disadvantages, like not knowing when to adapt your time management. So for example, during a session, a professional handball coach like Ricardo Vanciolis has set out a drill to develop a certain tactic for his team, and has planned for the drill to last around 20 minutes. So once the 20 minutes is finished, he decides to move on to the next part of the session. However, the team taking part in the drill haven't completed it very well, and may still need more time on the drill, but the coach decides to move on. This could cause the players to not understand the tactic, and therefore when it comes to a game and the coach comes to explain the tactic for a game situation, the players won't be able to use the tactic to their best ability. This is all because the coach didn't want to adapt the time management during the session, and therefore acts as a disadvantage. This could relate to other team sports where, due to the large numbers, some players who didn't get the drill and needed more time could be perhaps too scared to speak out. However, an individual sport like boxing, there would be one-to-one relationship between the athlete and coach, and could allow better communication between the two, and therefore allow a coach to know when to adapt their time management. Next we have due to the coach perhaps being so fixated on the idea of having a good supposed perfect time management, they could forget to allow some time to the individuals who need support that they are coaching. As this was mentioned in the last slide, it's very similar, so this could cause a lack of respect or in the relationship between a certain individual and the coach, and therefore is a disadvantage to the coach. For example, a casual mountain biking coach may feel that they need to focus on the time management so much they could forget to give support to those who need it. This could be in contrast to a professional tennis coach who, because of the media attention that they receive and the staff around them, they may be less likely to come into contact with this disadvantage, as they would be made aware of the probably know the player better and know their traits, whereas the casual mountain bike coach may not, due to the activity not being too serious. And then finally, another disadvantage to time management could be how when a coach has used the time management to set up a session, and due to poor punctuality, the players or athletes are late to the session, and therefore the time management has to be drastically changed to try and involve everyone well proportioned out the session. This is most probably quite unlikely, especially if the session has to take place in a hard facility like when a basketball coach. However, although this would cause serious issues, it wouldn't have as big of an impact as it would in a professional rugby coach, where it should cause a fine to punctuality, which reinforces the fact that even at such a high standard, being late to a session massively affects the time management.